All right, so you've been spending some time with all things cake press operator, and you've brought me quite the stack of guides and examples and even interview tips, huh? It's
Yeah.
like you're about to trade in the podcast mic for a baker's hat, except we're dealing with plastic sheets here, right?
Yeah, not your typical bakery, that's for sure.
So where do we even start with all of this?
Well, I think the most interesting thing about this whole cake press operator thing is that it's really this fascinating blend of like serious technical know-how, you know,
Uh,
but also a touch of artistry. You wouldn't think those two go together, but
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this.
so we're talking about these massive machines called, you guessed it, cake presses.
Hmm.
And they use these presses to like mold plastic chips into these perfectly uniform sheets,
Huh.
right? And the artistry comes in when you think about all the precision and the nuance that's involved in that.
I mean, because you're not just like pouring batter into a pan.
Exactly.
There's got to be more to it.
It's not just reading numbers on a gauge. It's like they develop this feel for the material.
Really?
Yeah, they can sense like these really subtle variations in the plastic, things that most people wouldn't even notice.
So it's almost like they can anticipate how the plastic is going to behave before it even happens.
Exactly, like how it flows under different temperatures and pressures.
Wow.
For example, did you know that even a tiny variation, and I mean tiny, in something called the melt flow index of the plastic,
Melt flow index.
yeah, it can totally change how the final product turns out.
Okay, now you're just using big words to sound smart.
No, but seriously, melt flow index, it's basically how easily the melted plastic flows, right?
Okay.
Higher melt flow index flows easier. You got to adjust the pressure.
Uh-huh.
It's a balancing act, and the really good operators, they get a feel for it over time.
So with all this talk of artistry, are we overlooking the technical side of things?
Not at all. Remember those cake molds we talked about?
The ones they use to bake the plastic sheets. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that visual.
Yeah. Well, not exactly your typical baking molds, but these things are seriously engineered, super precise, to create the exact shapes and thicknesses they need for different uses.
So there's a lot of technical know-how involved in setting those up and keeping them running smoothly, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The operator needs to understand how the press works, the plastic itself, and how to troubleshoot any little hiccup that pops up.
It's like a high-stakes game of Tetris with, like, molten plastic.
Yeah, kind of. And the pressure's always on.
Speaking of pressure, the guides mentioned something about, like, constantly adjusting the pressure and temperature during the molding process.
Yeah, that's where the real skill comes in, right?
So what's the deal with that? Why is it so important?
Okay, so picture this.
Mhm.
You've got these plastic chips, right? And they're heated up to crazy high temperatures, like molten.
Okay.
The operator, they have to make sure the temperature stays within a tiny, tiny range.
Wow. So the plastic melts evenly, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
But at the same time, they're controlling the pressure from the press itself.
Oh, I bet that's tricky because too much pressure and...
Too much, and you're overflowing everywhere. Too little, and you get a wonky sheet. It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Oh, wow.
It's like a dance, almost.
Yeah.
A very, very precise, high-pressure dance.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, it's intense.
I can only imagine the kind of focus that takes.
Yeah, it's not for everyone, that's for sure.
But it sounds kind of thrilling in a way, you know?
Oh, absolutely. It's high stakes.
Like, you really gotta be on top of your game every second, right?
Yeah, and it's not just reacting to what's happening right now. The best operators, they develop this almost like sixth sense for the process. You know what I mean?
Okay, like they can anticipate problems before they even happen.
Exactly. They're making these tiny adjustments constantly to keep everything running just so.
So they're like in tune with the machine almost.
Yeah, it's kind of like they become one with the press. They feel every little change.
That's wild. So where does someone even begin if they want to become this, like, cake press whisperer?
Well, that's the cool part. This isn't just like a dead-end job.
Okay.
The guides you brought, they show this clear path from like entry level all the way up to senior operator and even beyond.
Yeah, there was this one example, right, where this person started as like an assistant, just learning the basics, and they ended up running a whole operation.
Exactly. It's a real career with
Yeah.
room to grow and everything.
That's awesome. So as you move up the ranks, what kind of skills do you need to really excel?
Well, all that technical stuff we talked about, that becomes even more important.
Right.
You got to master different types of presses, solve all sorts of crazy mechanical problems.
So you're not just pressing buttons, you're like really getting your hands dirty.
Oh, yeah, it's hands-on for sure.
I like it.
Yeah.
But with all this emphasis on like machinery and technical stuff, we haven't really touched on like the human element.
Right. And that's a big part of it, too. You're not just working in isolation or good cake press operator. They're part of a team.
Yeah, there was that section in one of the guides about typical interactions, right?
Yeah, exactly. You got to be able to work with engineers, quality control, managers, the whole shebang.
So communication is key here.
Oh, absolutely. You got to be able to explain what you're seeing, troubleshoot problems together, make sure everyone's on the same page. It's a team effort.
I guess it's like any other job in that way. Communication is everything.
Yeah, and especially when you're dealing with something as complex as this, you know, clear communication can make or break the whole operation.
Totally. Now, one thing that really stuck out to me in these guides was this idea that cake press operators get to see the quote unquote fruits of their labor. What does that even mean in this context?
Right. So think about all the stuff you use every day that starts out as a plain old plastic sheet, right?
Okay.
Your phone case, food packaging, even parts in cars and airplanes. It all starts with a cake press operator.
Wow, I never really made that connection before.
Yeah, they're kind of like the unsung heroes of the manufacturing world.
That's a great way to put it. So it's more than just making plastic sheets, it's contributing to all these different products that we rely on every day. That's got to be a pretty rewarding feeling, knowing that you're playing a part in making all that stuff.
It really is. And that's something that a lot of people in this field talk about, that sense of purpose.
I bet. Okay, so we've talked about the cool parts of the job, but what about the challenges? What do the guides say about preparing for a career in this field?
Right. Well, they stress the importance of getting a solid foundation in hydraulics and plastic molding.
Which sounds kind of daunting, but
It's not as hard as it sounds. There are tons of resources out there, even for beginners.
yeah, like online courses, workshops, even just subscribing to industry newsletters, right?
Exactly. And hands-on experience, that's crucial too.
Oh, yeah, because reading about it is one thing, but actually doing it is a whole other ballgame.
For sure. And that's where apprenticeships come in, or
Yeah.
even entry-level positions.
Right, you can learn on the job.
Exactly. And this is where networking is huge.
Ah, networking, the magic word.
Right. Going to trade shows, conferences, even connecting with people online.
Just putting yourself out there.
It's all about making those connections.
I feel like that's good advice for any career, though.
You're right, but especially in a field like this where experience is so valued.
Totally, totally. Okay, so you've learned the ropes, you've got some experience under your belt. What about the interview process itself?
Right. Well, those sample interview questions you found were really interesting.
They were. I was surprised by how specific some of them got, like really digging into the nitty-gritty of the job.
Yeah. And it wasn't just about reciting facts. They were looking for problem-solving skills, how you think on your feet.
Yeah. Okay, so they want to see how you handle pressure, which makes sense in a high-pressure job.
Exactly. And one of the guides even suggested having a few stories ready to go.
Like anecdotes from your past experience.
Yeah, because anyone can say they're a hard worker or whatever. But if you can tell a compelling story about a time you solved a tricky problem on a press,
That's going to make a much bigger impact.
absolutely. It shows you've actually been there, done that.
Show, don't tell.
Exactly.
Yeah, stories are powerful. But we've talked a lot about, the technical skills, the interviews, all that. But what about the actual, physical part of the job?
Oh, yeah, it's not all just pushing buttons and flipping switches, right?
Right.
It can be demanding you're on your feet a lot, moving heavy stuff around.
Okay.
Those presses generate some serious heat, too.
So you got to be pretty tough to handle all that.
Yeah, you need stamina for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially you move up, the hours can get kind of unpredictable.
Oh, that's good to know. So it's not like a 9 to 5 kind of gig, especially at the higher levels.
Not always, no. But hey, for the right person, someone who likes to work with their hands, likes a challenge,
Mm-hmm. Someone who wants to see the results of their work, like we were saying before.
Exactly. It can be a really good fit.
Totally. And the guides did mention some pretty good perks, like the salary and the potential for growth.
Yeah, it's a solid career path,
Right.
and you're always learning new things. New technologies are coming out all the time.
So as we wrap up our deep dive here, what are some key takeaways you would leave our listeners with, like the most important things to remember?
Well, I think the biggest one is that being a cake press operator, it's more than just running a machine, you know.
Okay.
It's about the science behind it, the whole process, and how it connects to so many different industries.
Right, like you're part of something much bigger.
Exactly.
This has been awesome. I feel like I've learned so much. Like I never really thought about where all that plastic stuff comes from,
Yeah, it's easy to take it for granted.
Totally. So, to everyone listening, if you're thinking about this career path, or any career really, the things we talked about today, problem solving, thinking critically, Always learning.
Those are skills that will take you far no matter what you do.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It's been a pleasure diving into this with you. And who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be the one to invent the next big thing in wheat pressing.
That it could be something. All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening.